Hello, everybody, and welcome to Puck University Frozen 4 edition. I'm your host, Chris Lynch, and welcome to the newest episode of the show. We're recording this from high above the rink at the KeyBank Center in Buffalo, New York. It was at one point called, I believe, the First Niagara Center, and there's been some really important hockey played here. There was some stuff that I'm sure Buffaloans would like to forget, like the skate in the crease Brett Hull, the triple overtime game in '99 that ended up deciding the Stanley Cup for the Stars. And there is, of course, some college hockey that's played here. The Frozen Four this year is hosted by the MAC Conference, the one with two A's. And also Canisius and Niagara, which are the two Division I schools up here, are pitching in to host it as well. Why the MAC, the MAAC, which doesn't have... Well, okay, Miami, Ohio is in the MAC for regular sports, for non-hockey sports, so I guess that makes some sense, but it's not a hockey conference, it's a whole thing. In my honest opinion, we should have, if you're going to host it, then at least have a team that's in it, or have like some connection to the sport. I guess the MAC has some tacit connection. Obviously, Canisius and Niagara are right here, so that makes all the sense in the world. So that I'm cool with. But anyway, mini rant over. So I'm in Buffalo, and there's some hockey to talk about here. So what we're going to do for this episode is we're going to recount the arc for each of the teams that have taken them here. It'll be just me on this episode, no guests. It will be just me taking you through where we've been on this long and winding road to get to Buffalo, New York, to get to the City of Good Neighbors. I found out that was one of the nicknames that this place has earned. This is the second time that the Frozen Four has come to Buffalo proper. It went to Syracuse a few times in 1967 when Ned Harkness led Cornell to their first national championship over BU. Jack Kelly coached that squad. It was a 4-1 Cornell victory. It went out to Syracuse again in 1971 when BU claimed their first national championship over the Glenn Sonmore Minnesota Golden Gophers. That was a 4-2 final in BU's favor. It next went back out west. It's been to Lake Placid a couple times. In '84, we got the 4 overtime game between Bowling Green and Duluth. It went out to Lake Placid in 1988 when Lake Superior State beat St. Lawrence in overtime and truthfully kind of robbed them, if I'm to be somewhat realistic. I mean, the dude knocked the net off on purpose in the first Lake State championship game. I'm sorry, I have to say it. And so this is but the last time that this tournament was out here in Buffalo proper was in 2003. And in that season, Don Lucia led the Golden Gophers to their second consecutive national championship, and in that title game, they ended up defeating the University of New Hampshire, Dickie Millie's very good teams. It was a 1-1 tie after 2 periods, and then the Gophers went off. I think Thomas Vanek was ultimately the hero of that Frozen Four. Very, very fun series of games. Minnesota was down 2-0 to Michigan to start that game off. They battled back and ended up winning it in overtime. And then New Hampshire came up with the victory over Cornell 3-2, which they leaned into their goaltending. The MVP, Thomas Vanek was the most outstanding player, and it was the second consecutive victory for the Gophers. It was their 5th national championship. They have been stuck on that number ever since. And it was Denver would win the next 2 nationals in 2004 and 2005. Wisconsin won it in 2006. and then we finally got a CCHA team to come up and win it in Michigan State. So that was a stretch from 2002 to 2006 when the WCHA dominated college hockey. Just in the, I want to throw that out there for interesting historical perspective. But also of note that this is the last place where, this was one of the places where we got the first repeat national champion in 30 years. Because Minnesota won back-to-back in 2002 and 2003. They were the first team to win consecutive national championships since the 71-72 Boston University Terriers. Yeah, remember, BC in all their great years, they won in 08, 010, and 12. They didn't win back-to-backs ever. Cornell did not win back-to-backs. Denver won consecutively in 04 and 05, but before then they hadn't won consecutively. Michigan won a couple consecutively in the 50s, but it's been a while for them. Wisconsin has never won back-to-backs, so it's very hard to win consecutive national champions. And I think the obvious place to start is with the reigning national champions, the Minnesota-Duluth Bulldogs, who all season a favorite to make it back and to defend their title and repeat, a favorite to contend. They started off their season that way. Well, they had their opening weekend was kind of rocky. They tied the Gophers at home 1-1. They then lost in Mariucci to the Gophers 7-4, and that was maybe their worst game of the season for the remainder of the year. The rest of their October was dominant, sweeping Michigan Tech, Maine, and Notre Dame, all teams, all respectable programs. They lost only one game in November, and that was a 2-0 loss at Magnus Arena against one of the other Frozen Four teams, Denver. They won the second game against their Frozen Four counterpart 4-3. They had a very poor month of December. They went 1-3-1 across all the month, and that includes the long break. They lost the championship game of the Desert Classic to Clarkson, who only was outed by Notre Dame in a pretty thrilling game in the Manchester Regional. Split with St. Cloud, swept Miami and Omaha, split with Colorado College, which was a bit of a surprise. They split with Denver again at home, so they went 2-2 against the Pioneers this season in the regular year. They split with North Dakota, swept Miami, got swept at St. Cloud, and that was a point when there was maybe a little bit of doubt creeping in. Then they hosted Omaha, swept them, faced Denver in the semifinals of the NCHC tournament, and then they took it to double overtime of the NCHC championship game against St. Cloud on, by the way, the same sheet of ice on which they won the national championship last year, the XL Energy Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. Wasn't as big a crowd. It was 10,000 people. Duluth only, through that whole game, through late into, because the winning goal came 7:29 into the final, 7:29 into the second overtime. They got 30 shots throughout. In fact, Duluth, 6 shots in the first, 5 shots in the second, 8 shots in the third, 7 in the first overtime, and 4 in a little under a half of the frame. They took many more penalties than did St. Cloud and Hunter Shepard. I was very critical of Hunter Shepard after the Frozen Four last year for one specific reason, and it wasn't really his fault. Hunter Shepard faced a grand total of 20 shots in both games of last year's Frozen Four, between the Ohio State game and the Notre Dame game. He did not face more than 20 shots. And in fact, for that national championship game against the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame, he did not face a single shot for the final 7+ minutes of the national championship game. I didn't think he should be awarded the goaltender spot on the all-tournament team. I thought it should have been Cale Morris, and I thought that he didn't face that much pressure. He made 37 saves, allowed 2 goals, 39 shots in that championship game against St. Cloud, and I'm not allowed to say anything about him because he showed up, and he played very well in the game that mattered the most. So as a result, the Bulldogs were awarded with the second overall seed in the NCAA tournament, and they did what they do best: play tight games and break people's hearts. They faced off against Bowling Green, who was one of the sentimental teams and one of the ones that people wanted to see move on. I'll admit I did too. And Bowling Green had last been in the NCAA tournament in 1990, so almost 30 years had gone by since the Falcons had reached it. And Bowling Green forced Duluth into overtime, but Parker McKay had both goals, the captain of the Duluth Bulldogs. They pulled it off, and that ended up knocking out Bowling Green. And then the string of 1-goal games in the NCAA tournament, which I think at that point had reached 12 or 13 consecutive 1-goal games for Duluth, came to an end against Quinnipiac when there was an empty netter to seal the third consecutive trip to the Frozen Four for Minnesota-Duluth. And I'll add on a note as well that I mean this very sincerely, they're one of the best dynasties that we've had in a very long time. If they beat Providence on Thursday night, they will make it to 3 consecutive national championship games. I think the last time that happened was, and I need to make sure I check this, Lake Superior State reached 3 consecutive championship games. 92, they beat Wisconsin 5-3. 94, they pummeled the ever-loving hell out of BU 9-1. The only one they lost was 93 when they ran into Paul Correa and Jim Montgomery, and I still argue the greatest college hockey team of all time. And it took that unit to beat Lake State. So they ended up losing to one of the greatest assemblies of collegiate talent that any sport has, I think, has ever seen. So there's certainly no shame in that. And Lake State, one of the great lost and kind of forgotten about powers in college hockey. But they are the last team to have reached 3 consecutive national championship games. And the Bulldogs have the opportunity to become the first team to do that in 25 years if they were able to pull it off. And they come at this year with kind of an interesting situation. They're built from the back up. They are a defensive-minded team through and through. They're one of the highest-ranked teams on the penalty kill. Well, they're 10th in that category as far as they give up goals per game. They are 4th as far as their goal margin. As far as their goal margin, it's kind of interesting. They're 48th because their offense has been a little bit suspect at different points throughout the season. They're 11th, which, compared to some of the other teams that are here, namely Providence and UMass, that leaves a little bit to be desired. They're ahead of Denver, who is tied with Notre Dame at 28th nationally, but, c'est la vie, I suppose. Defense is their calling card. This blue line of Scott Perunovich, Louis Rail, these guys who have been there and have been through the fights, have been through the wars, this is a team that is built on a suffocating defense of not allowing you to have space to work with. And Parker McKay is the leading scorer on this team. 38 games played this year for the captain. The senior captain, 15 goals, 15 assists, for 30 points. Scott Perunovich, the Blues draft pick, has 26 assists of his 29 points. So he's had a remarkable season. He leads the way on power play points. He leads the team on assists per game. Nick Swaney is also tied for the team high in goal scoring. This is a team that will trade blows with you, will trade punches with you, and will be ready to go fisticuffs with you if that's the kind of game that you want to play. They aren't the highest skill team, if that makes sense. As far as their goals scoring per game, it's very spread out, but they have enough talent to really cause some problems. And they've got people who've been here for a couple years now. The junior class, Riley Tufte and Nick Wolf and Jade Miller, and that junior class, they know nothing except reaching the Frozen Four. That sophomore class, they know nothing but playing in the Frozen Four. I mean, the blue line is their best thing. Louis Rail was spectacular in last year's Frozen Four, and he's not been great points-wise this season. He's only got 10 in 40 games played, but he's a strong defensive presence. Mikey Anderson, more points, but good presence. Justin Richards has been good all season. Scotty P has been excellent. Dylan Sandberg missed a few games. He's played in 37 of the 40 games, but he's been outstanding. Nick Wolf is the only of the regular defensive starters. He's one of the few who is a junior who wasn't a freshman last season, because they rolled 5 freshmen on last year's team and 1 sophomore. So this is a team that's been together. This is a team that has been through wars. This is a team that was expected at the start of the year to compete for national championship, and they're here trying to compete for a national championship. Their opponent in game number 1 will be the Providence College Friars. Now, if you would have said at the start of the season that they will be in the NCAA tournament, they would have said, yeah, that's bare minimum of what we expect. If you had said that they would have been in the Frozen Four, okay, I could believe it. If you'd said that they would be in there after they missed the Hockey East semis and after they had kind of an up and down stretch through the season, I would have had a much harder time buying that. So here's the arc of their season. They beat AIC in Miami to open. They lose 3-0 to Notre Dame. They tie Sacred Heart, which was a bad tie at the time. They trounced Connecticut and UConn. And they trounced UConn and they trounced BU. 7-2 and 5-0 in those games. Then November was kind of an odd month for them. They won 3 games. And the teams they beat, they shut out Holy Cross and they pummeled Merrimack, 7-2, 7-5. The teams they lost to, they were swept by UMass in 2 games in which Providence was 150 billion% the better team in both of those games. And Matt Murray stood on his brain and robbed the Friars completely blind of 2 3-2 decisions. So that's just how that whole thing works itself out. And they went to Denver. They lost 3-1. So they have faced the Pioneers before. Of course, the team that they will not end up facing, because, of course, that's not how this ends up working itself out. So they lost and tied to Denver. 3-1 Pioneers in the first game of that series, and 4-4 tie in the second game of that series, which, getting out of Magnus with at least a tie is acceptable, but it's not a very good weekend. And then they tied New Hampshire to end November, so they ended up going 3-3-2. That's not a good month in the slightest. December, beat everybody. Beat New Hampshire, Merrimack, Brown, and Dartmouth. January, another rocky month for them in January. A win and a tie against Miami. They lost 3 out of 4. Those 3 that they lost were to BC and BU. The one they won was against Brown in obviously a non-conference game, and in the Mayor's Cup, they won that one 5-1. They swept Northeastern 4-1 and 3-0. They had a bad weekend against Vermont, 3-1 and 1-1 tie. Split with Maine. Then they put together a stretch from the 15th of February through the 15th of March, so a good solid month in which they did not lose. 6-1 over Lowell, 1-0 over Lowell, 3-2 over UMass when they kind of got outplayed, but handled themselves well. 5-2 at UConn. They tied 1-1 at home against BU, and then to end their regular season, they beat BC 3-1 in a very physical game. Now, the playoff series against BC. This was the turning point when Providence looked like they were going to be knocked out and done at the end of all of it. They won the first game 5-4 in overtime. They then proceeded to lose 4-3 in overtime to Jerry York and the Eagles, and they lost on Sunday 2-1 in regulation. And after that loss, and Nate Leaman has said this himself, he didn't feel all that good about the chances for the Minutemen to pull off. He didn't feel that good about the chances for, for Providence to end up making it back here, or rather to make it to the NCAA tournament. But they did. They were placed in the Providence Regional, which threw some consternations, but they fell behind 3-0 to start their game against the top seed, the Minnesota State Mavericks. Came back and scored 6 unanswered goals, and then pummeled Cornell 4-0. And they get to face Minnesota-Duluth. Now, these are pretty interesting teams to match up against each other. They're two, in virtually every statistical matchup, they're right next to each other. They're 4 and 5 in goals allowed. They're testing out the audio quality for some of their tech stuff that they'll be doing for the games tomorrow. So, this program is these teams are beautifully matched up against each other. They've played a lot of, particularly. They've played similar styles of hockey. They're both very strong. They're very heavy. They've played kind of similar schedules in the sense of, well, Duluth obviously ended up pulling through and winning the whole thing. Providence got away with some fortunate sequences, but hey, they both ended up getting here. They're both recent champions. Duluth, of course, won it last year. Meanwhile, Providence won theirs in 2015. And no team, none of the players is still around, but they're still back here. These teams haven't faced off against each other since 2016, when Providence was a top seed in the East Regional at the DCU Center in Worcester, Massachusetts. Ended up being a 2-1 Duluth victory, in which Providence felt like they should have moved on, and they felt like that team was a better unit than the one that won the national championship the year prior. So in terms of the players on the ice, there isn't a lot of familiarity, all things considered, between these two programs, just as far as the games themselves have been concerned. That said, stylistically, they're very similar, and that makes predicting a winner quite tricky, because I think Providence is a better scoring team. I think Duluth is probably a better defensive team. I think they have the best blue line in the entire country. So, goaltending, Hayden Hockey, when he's on, he's magnificent. If he's off, yeah. And Hunter Shepard, I think he's excellent. I don't think he'll end up winning the... I don't believe he will end up pulling out the victory for the... I don't believe he'll end up pulling out the victory for the... It's a weird thing to try and... It's a weird thing to try and pick out, because I don't know which goaltender is better. I don't know which unit altogether is better. I know that they're perfectly matched, but if I had to pick one of them, I will pick Duluth based off of the experience that the Bulldogs bring. That unit, that blue line in particular, is good enough by themselves, I feel, to win a national championship. So there was a lot of talk about this potentially being a multi-overtime game. Yeah, that conversation is entirely justified. So I'll expect this to be tight, narrowly contested, bitterly fought. I'll say Duluth ends up winning 2-1 in overtime. I really think this game turns out to be that close. Now, the other two teams that will face off on Thursday night, which this might be a bit of a long night if my predictions are anything correct. And I got half of the Frozen Four right, which is more than zero of the Frozen Four correct. And it pits one of the teams I got right, Duluth, the other team I got right, and one that has been, I think, a spectacular story for the sport, and a reminder that college hockey has parity that is unrivaled in any other bit of college athletics. The University of Massachusetts Minutemen. Don't call them UMass Amherst. It's a very touchy subject. That team, wire to wire, they were the best team that Hockey East produced. Wire to wire, they were as deep and as complete a team as possible. They lost only one game in their first 2 months. It was a game at the number one ranked at the time, Ohio State Buckeyes, 3-1. Other than that, they cruised. They were outplayed by Providence, but still won because Matt Murray played out of his mind. Beat ranked Princeton in overtime. They didn't lose a game until they became the number one team in the country and ended up falling at Quinnipiac to the Bobcats 4-0. This was part of Andrew Shortridge's very strong push to try and get the Mike Richter Award. We'll touch on that a little bit later. UMass rebounded at home, won 3-1 over Quinnipiac, and then they beat Yale to close out their first half with 2 losses in the first half of their season. They came back and immediately lost to Lowell, which they're very fortunate that they did not face UMass Lowell later on in the Hockey East tournament, because for some reason that matchup is still tough. They had a couple more challenges in the back half of January when they, on the first night, the 18th of a series against Northeastern, they pummeled the Huskies into the ground. They did something similar in terms of the pace of play in the Saturday night game at Matthews Arena, but Northeastern pulled off the overtime victory because Tyler Madden played very well and Caden Primo played very well. They split with Maine at Maine, and that loss to the Black Bears at the Alphon was... I remember this fondly when they went in and played BU at Aganis the next weekend. Carville walks in, and there's no lead-in for him to say. There's no the SID saying, "Coach, opening statement." He just walks in, sits down, and immediately says, "The only thing I like about losing is the fact that it resets us." And he was not happy with that loss to Maine. They came out, won 7-5 at BU, and what I still say from an offensive standpoint is the best game I watched this season. They swept the Terriers the next weekend. The next weekend. They played only one game then. They beat them up 4-2. Lost to Lowell, again, 2-0. They're very fortunate that wasn't the matchup. They faced BC and swept them in a home-and-home 4-3 and 4-2. They then played kind of an interesting back half of the season in which they lost 3-2 at Princeton. They beat Merrimack for their first crowning moment, their first coronation moment, when they won the first regular season championship that the Minutemen have ever won in men's hockey. 4-2 at Lawler. Then they pummel Maine 6-0. They lost at UConn, in which they played all 3 goaltenders, and that was the plan. Then in the playoffs, they fell behind 3-0 to New Hampshire, and they switched goaltenders. Matt Murray, who had been the slated starter all year, was pulled, and Philip Lindbergh, who was not on the Minutemen's radar until late on in the summertime. He was a late arrival to the place. He came on. He did allow one more goal when Chris Miller made it a 4-1 game. But, when he made it a 4-2 game, Trevigno and Pritchard got 2 goals to cut down the lead. But Trevigno got his second goal of the game to make it a one-goal game. Cale Makar nodded even, and Mitchell Chafee punched one over Mike Robinson. Who, keep your eyes on Mike Robinson for next season at the UNH. I think he'll do something. I think he'll do quite well. And then the second game of that series, UMass just beat UNH into the ground 6-0, and it was over after the first period. It wasn't even close. And then came another turning point for them. They went to TD Garden and got shut out by a much more determined Boston College team who played the absolute best hockey that they could have possibly played. And then they lost 3-0, and UMass reset themselves and simplified their game. They were rewarded with a 4-0 shutout of Harvard, in which they thoroughly dominated, and a 4-0 shutout of Notre Dame, in which they thoroughly dominated. And the third period of that game against Notre Dame was the crowning moment to this point of the program, or a indication that, you know what, they deserve to be here. They deserve to be the team that one of the teams that would represent Hockey East, and represented them with a lot of pride and represented them very well. They come in as one of the top offensive units in the league. In the country. They have the second best power play. They have the guy who should win the Hobey Baker by a landslide. In fact, let me touch on this right now. Cale Makar is the best defenseman I've ever seen at the college hockey level. That includes Charlie McAvoy. That includes Matt Grizzly. That includes Will Butcher. That includes everybody on Duluth. Cale Makar is the best defenseman I have seen in college hockey. He should win. The other two finalists are Adam Fox, who is coming back for a senior season, at least it seems like he's coming back. He'll make a run at the Hobey if he comes back and plays a senior season for Harvard next year, and he'll make a great push for it and play very well, and Harvard will hopefully make a good run to the ECAC championship, and, he'll have a good case at it next year, I assume. Then your other contender is Jimmy Schultz, who, on his own, great player, but if I am to be the most generous, he isn't going to end up winning it because of that St. Cloud loss to American International College. That loss will have massive repercussions. The loss to Air Force was somewhat forgivable because Air Force had historical pedigree. They had won championships in the Atlantic. They had been a thorn in people's side. They had, the prior year, been a game away from the Frozen Four. And they had conditioning that no one can match because they're a military school. The loss to American International College is going to haunt St. Cloud as long as, put bluntly, as long as they remain unable to win. As long as they remain unable to pull off a victory in the NCAA tournament and get to the Frozen Four and eventually win the national, do what Virginia did in the men's basketball tournament, that's going to haunt them. So I don't mean to dig up old wounds, St. Cloud fans, but I don't see how. I don't see Jimmy Schultz ended up winning. I think Adam Fox is a great player, but I think he'll have a chance to do it next year. And I think Cale Makar is the best defenseman I've ever seen in college hockey. I think he's the best player in this sport since Jack Eichel. I think he'll win the Hobey. So, yeah. They didn't say who was going to start in net. In fact, Coach Carville was expressly saying, I'm not going to tell you about that because I don't know who's playing yet. He deferred to his goaltending coach to handle matters there. So that's the third of the teams. The last team to make it to the big dance, the Denver Pioneers. This is one of the most decorated programs that the sport has to offer, and a national championship win ties the Denver Pioneers with Michigan for the most national championships in the history of the sport. You had better believe that Denver is fully aware of that. and that they absolutely want to go and try and win a national championship to stamp their name next to Michigan, and maybe eventually pass Michigan. This team, the most astounding thing about the Pioneers, in my estimation, is their head coach, Carl. He's 29 years old, a rookie, first-time head coach, and his team is in the Frozen Four. He was an assistant coach for a while under Jim Montgomery's staff. He was on that team in 2017, which was fully loaded. That's the best team I've seen in college hockey, top to bottom. That team just owned the place. So he did have some time to foster and develop. And it's an interesting road that they rode to get here. So they opened up with wins at Air Force, beating up on Huntsville, beating Fairbanks 4-1, and tying Fairbanks 3-3. Not a good thing to tie to Fairbanks. Swept Western Michigan, got swept by St. Cloud, split with Duluth, who's probably their biggest rival in the NCHC, dating back to that 2017 season when they were the two best teams in the country. Had their series against Providence, 1-0-1. Split with North Dakota, came out east and beat up on Merrimack and UMass Lowell to wrap up the 2018 calendar. They opened up the second half of the year very hot. They went to Wisconsin and swept the Badgers. They swept Omaha, and then they ran into some trouble at the end of the month. Tied Colorado College 4-4. They were supposed to play a second game on Friday, but that had to be rescheduled because of very bad snow. And then they got swept in Kalamazoo by Western Michigan 3-1 and 5-1. They then had a win and a tie against North Dakota. They split at Duluth, split at home against Miami, beat CC to close up February, a win and a tie against Omaha, got swept by Colorado College, which that's not good. They beat up on North Dakota 2-0 and 4-2 to wrap up the opening round of the NCHC and send North Dakota home for the season. They lost in the semifinal 3-0 to Minnesota-Duluth in the NCHC tournament. There is a consolation game in that conference's tournament setup, and they ended up playing Colorado College in that consolation and beat them up 6-1. That's more for pride because Denver hates Colorado College. They then were slotted in as the 2 seed in the West Regional, the Fargo Regional, and they pulled 2 shutouts, 2-0 over Ohio State and 3-0 over AIC to get back here. This is their third Frozen Four appearance in 4 seasons. They went in 2016. They were outed by North Dakota in a very tightly contested game, which, had Denver won, I do think they would have won the national championship in 2016. I really do think that team was good enough to win a national championship that season. It might have been a tighter battle between Quinnipiac and Denver than it turned into between Quinnipiac and North Dakota, but hindsight is 20/20, I suppose. They obviously reached in 2017 and dominated Notre Dame and then beat Duluth by hanging on by the skin of their teeth in the final minutes to end up winning 3-2 for their 8th national championship. Were outed in the Midwest Regional Final by Ohio State last season, and then got the chance to exercise those demons and beat up on Ohio State 2-0 and ended one of the great Cinderella stories that the sport had to offer this year, AIC, in a 3-0 final. So, that is how Denver got here. And how about the team itself? The junior and senior classes were on that 2014 team, and there's some notable pieces still remaining. Like Jared Lucas-Savicius, the team's leading goal scorer with 19 goals this season in 39 games, 29 points. He was the MVP of that national championship and scored a hat trick in that game against Duluth, all in the second period of that game. So he's still here. Liam Finley's still here, 36 points. Colin Staub is still here. Tyson McClellan, Lester Lancaster has been a bigger piece of the team this year. But there's a lot of young blood that's been filling in. Ian Mitchell, sophomore on defense, a Chicago draft pick. Cole Gutman, a Tampa pick. Brett Stapley, both Gutman and Stapley are both forwards, and Stapley is a Montreal pick. And the real prize of that freshman class, Emilio Peterson, a Calgary Flame draft pick, has 6 goals and 24 assists. He's leading his team in assists. He's a native of Mangerland, Norway. I hope I pronounced the name of your hometown correctly. He has been found money in a lot of ways this season. And the other thing that they did very, very, very well was transition from Mike Richter award-winning goaltender Tanner Gillette to a very strong tandem. You flip a coin between Devin Cooley and Philip Larson. Cooley was there for a lot of it. The save percentages are basically identical, .934 and .935 between Cooley and Larson, respectively. These guys really, it's a similar thing that UMass has actually. Lindbergh and Murray are both quality goaltenders, so flip a coin between both these guys. You have 4 goaltenders who could be on the ice and could win you a game. Larson played against Ohio State and against AIC. He shut out both of his opponents. He recorded 24 saves against the Buckeyes and 26 saves against AIC. So, as far as the defensive prowess is concerning, they might have some bit of advantage against the Minutemen. However, there is a enormous drop-off in offensive potence between these two teams. Well, first off, on the power play, UMass is second overall in the country in terms of power play percentage. Meanwhile, our friends at Denver are 48th. So if Denver gets undisciplined and just doesn't handle themselves particularly well, it's going to be a really long game for the Denver Pioneers. So they had better be smart enough to not commit any penalties and not smart enough to not give any opportunities to get on the bad side of a Cale Makar. Just rocket. As far as goals for per game, UMass is ranked third. They average 3.77 goals a game, only behind St. Cloud and Penn State. Denver, they ranked 28th. They were tied with Notre Dame. So there is some offensive differences between these teams. And as far as goals against as well, UMass has a slight advantage. It's basically a statistical tie. These are the 6th and 7th best defensive teams. UMass with a 197 goals against average, Denver with a 198. It's basically identical between those two. The goal margin per game is a bit higher for UMass at 179 compared to Denver's 082. Denver's played a lot more close games, and UMass at some points pulled away from their opponents. As far as the penalty kill is concerned, UMass, one of the top in the nation, they're 4th, which they have an .875 penalty kill. Denver is 21st. This special teams unit is not bad. But the special teams, the defensive special teams are not bad for Denver. The offensive special teams for Denver are 48th best among 60 teams. And the more I look at this unit, the more I look at this team that Denver has to throw out against UMass, and the more I look against, there's a lot more experience. There's significantly more experience on this Denver team than there is on the UMass team. But experience and having been in prior situations before, that only gets you so far. You have to step up and play the games with the talent that you have. And so, my honest-to-goodness expectation, I really do think UMass is the better team, and I think that they will be playing for the national championship on Saturday night. So that's what I think will end up happening on Thursday. I think it'll be Duluth narrow. I think it'll be UMass 4-2 over Denver. Maybe 4-1 if Lindbergh or Murray have a great game in that. So let's touch briefly. I already did my whole thing on the Hobie. Let's touch briefly on the Richter Award. There are 5 nominees for the best goaltender in college hockey. In alphabetical order by name, they are Joey Dackard of Arizona State, Jake Kiley of Clarkson, Caden Primo of Northeastern, Hunter Shepard of Minnesota-Duluth, and Andrew Shortridge of Quinnipiac. So we have 1 sophomore amidst 4 juniors, and these are all worthy contenders. Some notable names, neither UMass goaltender Murray or Lindbergh are on here. Jake Ottinger is not on here. Hayden Hockey is not on here. Not to say that Hockey East is poorly represented, of course. Caden Primo is considered by many people to be the favorite to end up winning this. And, Primo's goals against average is a 2 even, which that's an individual thing. That's not an individual thing. His record this year, 25-9-1. He played in a lot more games than Andrew Shortridge, who had the fewest losses, and also had the best save percentage at .941. Also the best goals against at .151. Also made the fewest saves, because Shortridge, 570 saves. The next closest to him is Hunter Shepard, 802. So I don't think Shortridge will end up winning the Richter, not because he doesn't deserve it, but because he didn't play enough. And that was his coach's decision to not put him in net more frequently. Otherwise, I think he'd have a much stronger case. He played a grand total of 1,400 minutes. The next closest is actually is Joey Dackard, and he played 2,000. It's a 600-minute gap between the 2 goaltenders. So, sorry, dude. I don't think Shortridge will end up winning the Hobie. Hunter Shepard had the lowest save percentage at .918, and I think that Shepard, rightly or wrongly, I think he'll be viewed as a result of his defensive output, or his performance is in not a terribly small part, partly due to the fact that his blue line in front of him is majestic and outstanding. And I just think we're going to end up, I just don't think that he'll end up winning the Richter Award this year for that purpose and that reason. Jake Kiley of Clarkson has already signed an NHL deal, 929 save percentage. He is one of the 3 of these guys were conference champions, Kiley, Shepard, and Primo. And he made 931 saves on the season. He lifted Clarkson, and the more I look at this, the more I find it to be a really hard award to pick, honestly. I kind of want to pick Primo, but that's more so for my own Hockey East perception, because I saw him more than any of the other goaltenders here. Joey Dackard was the goaltender who did the most with the least and with the lowest expectations on him. And he lifted Arizona State, a team with no conference, a team that traveled all over the country in a way that no one else has to, and he lifted them to the NCAA tournament. So I'm honestly inclined to want Joey Dackard to win it, but from what I could tell, it seems like Caden Primo is the favorite, so I think Primo will win, but I would lobby very, very heavily for Joey Dackard for what he did helping to lift the Sun Devils to where they ended up. That's no small feat, and I would absolutely give my vote to Joey Dackard. All right, so a hypothetical national championship game between UMass and Minnesota-Duluth. Do we have a repeat champion, or do we have the best story in college hockey completed, and do we add to the number of teams that have won national championships? That's a really hard choice, honestly. In fact, while I'm recording this, I'm looking up at the banners. It's a row fully across. The ones closest to me are B to M. So BC, BU, Bowling Green, Colorado College, Cornell, Denver, Harvard, Lake Superior State, Maine, Michigan, and Michigan State. 11 schools are right in front of me. On the opposite side of the building, there's no press row on that side. On the opposite side of the building are the banners for Michigan Tech, Minnesota, Minnesota-Duluth, North Dakota, Northern Michigan, Providence, RPI, Union, Wisconsin, and Yale. 21 schools are represented in these banners who have won national championships. And I can't help but feel like we're knocking on the door of there being a 22nd school to add their banners up here. I do think that UMass is total package the best team coming in this tournament. I think they're the best team. I think they have the most to prove. Duluth has nothing to prove at this point, truthfully. They've proven themselves a dynasty. They've won 2 NCHC championships. They've been in 3 Frozen Fours. If they beat Providence, it'll be 3 consecutive national championship games. They have nothing to prove. Denver, nothing to prove. They've won 8 natties. They have nothing to prove. Providence, respected program. They have something to prove that they can be consistently in the Frozen Four. But by and large, UMass is the team that is going to look at themselves and say they have the most to prove. And in a way, historically, against the sport, it's kind of right. So I can't help but feel like they're going to be so locked in and so focused on winning it that we're going to end up seeing a Minutemen National Championship. It wouldn't surprise me if Duluth wins it. It wouldn't surprise me if Denver were to pull off the win. Hell, it wouldn't even surprise me if Providence were to pull magic and repeat their 2015 performance, much as it would pain me to watch that again in some ways. But I just don't see how I mean this genuinely. I don't see how UMass is not more talented than the 3 other teams that are here. So I think we'll see UMass end up winning. I will not even bother to hazard a guess as to the MVP or the all-tournament team. I'm not even going to bother trying to guess. But to make my record clear, my championship prediction, I think the game will be between Duluth and UMass. And I think UMass will end up winning. And if I had to put a score to it, 4-2, empty netter for UMass. And that's what I think will end up happening at the KeyBank Center on Saturday night. That's what I think will end up happening in the Frozen Four. Thank you so very much for listening, for tuning in, for finding us. You can follow me, Chris Lynch, on Instagram at cclynch16. You can follow me on Instagram at cclynchwall. Twitter, cclynchwall. Instagram, cclynch16. You can follow this podcast on both of those sites at University Puck. You can find us and listen to our other episodes on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, and Blog Talk Radio. So, for everybody here with the Frozen Four that will be tuning in and will get the opportunity to enjoy it, have a safe trip out here to Western New York, where all the Buffalo people, you finally get to have good hockey. You get Frozen Four hockey for the first time in 16 years. You get good hockey generally for the first time since When did you guys last make? 2010. I'm looking at the banners that are hanging for the Sabres that they left up that didn't touch from the NCAAs. 2010, last time that the Sabres had much to Bambi about it. That's really depressing. So you get good hockey, Buffalo. I hope that you will be able to tune in and enjoy the games. They'll be on ESPN. Butchergrass and Melrose with the call. Westwood One has the radio calls for both of those games. Thank you so very much for your interest in college hockey. Thank you so very much for your listening to me. And just my perspective for what I think will end up happening for this year's Frozen Four. Best of luck to all of the teams. And in the words of the great Tim Williams, keep your head up and your hits clean.